everybody for coming to the session with the unsexiest hashtag possible. We're just saying it looks like you're going to come here and have to work. So this is the Making It Work When You're Already Working panel, and this it's actually a roundtable, and this came out of a discussion amongst several of us last year at MCN, which we talked about how a lot of us are doing digital projects or working on digital projects, but that for many of us it's not explicitly in our job description. And so we already often have a full-time job and then are trying to do these projects in addition. And I actually now have the experience of having been in that position, and now I'm in a new position where I actually have it explicitly in my job description, and I still have another full-time job that I'm still trying to do. So even when it's in your job description, what I've realized is it doesn't actually help. You're still trying to fit everything in, and it's usually kind of more than a full-time job's worth. So we figured we would start by just introducing ourselves. So I'm Jennifer Foley. I'm Director of Interpretation at the Cleveland Museum of Art. The main digital project that I'm currently working on is called Art Lens. It is a mobile app for the permanent collection at CMA. This is showing one of the functions of it, which is the Near You Now function, in which it will show you where on the museum map you are, and then show you which objects in that room nearby you have been interpreted and have additional interpretation for them. And then there is a series of tours that are in there. You can select from those that will sort of walk you through various parts of the collection. And then finally there is, it doesn't. There's a little bit of a lag. There is another thing. There we go. Okay. That's so there is also the option to scan artwork. It uses image recognition on the interpreted objects. When you hold up the iPad, it will read the object and then bring up hotspots that have information attached to them. This app is going to be launching to the public in January. So this is the thing that's taking up a lot of my time. But of course, I still already have other things that are my responsibility. So that's some of what we're going to be talking about. There we go.
Hi, I'm Lindsay O'Leary, and I just left the Mattress factory. I was there for 5.5 years, and for the last 2 years, I was the communications and digital media manager. And the huge project I was working on there was a little too big. I was the only full-time person working on it, and I was also the marketing department of one, all print and digital marketing efforts. And the project I was working on, you can go to the, sorry. Oh, I should also mention that for the last month, I've been working now at a small liberal arts college in Pittsburgh. And so I can talk about what things didn't go so well.
It's up
yeah.
now. So do you want to talk about
So the project is, so I should say the Mattress Factory is, for those who don't know, it's a museum of installation art. It's all temporary, almost all temporary pieces. And the work is created by living artists. It's all site-specific. So the plus side of that is almost all of our artists are still living, about 600 artists. And we have a pretty open policy with everything from visitors touching things to photography, and we wanted to take that another step further by letting people say more about their reaction and interact a little bit more intimately with the objects we have, or the installations. And so we wanted to create a new way of sharing our collections online and digitally/physically. Wanted to give people new ways to do that, and one of the ways is augmented reality app that's still everything is still prototype on the project, because it ended up being too big, and people can interact with social media, take pictures, and one of the things with the database is that people could take pictures and email it to our collections database, and it actually goes within our collections database. So everything went into one central place, is going into one central place, I should say. And that's something that's not really being done anywhere, that we're opening up the floodgates both ways. So we're trying to push data out and letting people put their own opinion into a formal, like, Dublin core collections database schema, which is, there are a lot of, you'd like pick up a rock and you're like, oh man, there's all these other problems, and you'd solve a couple more problems and you pick up another rock and you're like, oh no. So it had some issues. But the fun part is we're trying to figure out different ways for people to interact with the art, since it's temporary, so stuff is all ephemeral. It's only there for a few months, the vast majority. And how do we save that? How do we share that with future generations? How do we keep the data, the digital data, good for, decades or 100 years? So, that was that project.
Great. I am Chad Weinard. Excuse my voice. I've lost it. If you find it, let me know. I am the manager of new media at the North Carolina Museum of Art. I do design, development, and some content strategy, as well as social media for the museum. That is kind of my day job. I also work on strategy for long-term projects when there's time, and try to fit in some short-term projects. A lot of the things we've been working on lately have been focused on staff involvement with social media, and I've done a lot of education, cheerleading, a little bit of hand-holding, some educating lately, and have gotten staff really excited about what's going on. And we've also been working on finding new ways to bring in visitor content. This is a project, and perhaps we can talk about this a little bit later as well. I try to make a little bit of time for experimental projects, even within our staff. This is a project that started as an email I sent out just 2 weeks ago to a core group of staff that were that I had kind of involved with social media projects throughout the last few months. We had a great exhibition just opening, Edvard Munch prints from MoMA, and had this idea and really just wanted to experiment to see if Instagram could be a platform for kind of guerrilla art history. So we were trying to link Edvard Munch prints with items in our collection. I sent out a somewhat tongue-in-cheek challenge to my core group of digital people and said, here's your mission. See if you can find parallels to these Munch images in the West Building, which houses our permanent collection. Use these tools, post them on Instagram, and let's see what we get. This is a screenshot from last week, I think. Has about half of the items that we've come in. The staff feedback was great. They had a fun time doing it. And it was the kind of thing that they also did on their free time, so to speak. We've been talking about next steps for this. Again, it's not even a project. This was just an idea that I had that I brought up with the team. Next steps for this is that we're going to bring in the curators to talk about these juxtapositions, whether they're silly, whether they make sense, or whether we've struck some amazing art historical nugget that has never been seen before. We'll see. But we'll post those on the museum blog and see what's next. This is, I mentioned, trying to engage visitors' content as well. This is another experiment that I put up together. Instagram photos. So any Instagram photo that was tagged a certain way or geolocated at the North Carolina Museum of Art, or in our park or in our restaurant, ended up on this Tumblr site. And it's something that I tweak every so often. Turns out there are 6 other institutions around the world that use NCMA, the National Concrete and Masonry Association, etc. So there's a lot of data grooming that goes along with it, but it was an amazing, one-day experiment that even staff love to check in and just see what images are flowing through that day. So those are just two really, in the last month, kind of short-term projects to give maybe a conversation starter on how to develop experiments with your staff.
And then it's me. I'm Seema Rao, the Director of Intergenerational Learning for the Cleveland Museum of Art, and Jennifer and I work together on the app that you mentioned, and that's just part of my job. Some of you might have come to see me talk ad nauseum about Gallery 1. We're developing a new learning space that has 4 constituent spaces in it and has numerous interactive elements to it. It includes curated art installations, a space for families, and sorry, our PowerPoint's very persnickety. So in the space for families, we have all these different elements. We have the posters that you see up there, which we need to do them very quickly, and so somebody asked me do half of them, so I did. We have story time, we have art projects, we have all these things going on in the midst of developing a learning center that's going to be the size of it's going to be actually larger than any of our exhibition halls. Along with that, let's see if I can find, sorry, my PowerPoint's not working. So along with developing these interactives, I also run a department. All sort of informal education studio programs, family guides. This should not, I'm not whining because I'm sure a lot of you have the same job description. Everything that seems like it's not formal education goes to her. So I'm sort of the catch-all for anything. Somebody said to me yesterday, "Oh, intergenerational learning means just for kids, right?" And I said, no. In the way that we think of it is, if you're not here in a formal classroom setting, then it goes into intergenerational learning. So that could be any way that I want to stretch it. And so while it can be overwhelming, of course, like all of us on this panel and probably many of you in this room, it seems really exciting. And so I say yes to all kinds of things, like, a book project about all the studio projects we've done in the last 100 years, or a family guide, or looking at how we're going to do family technology in the future. So that's sort of a sneak peek, and let's see, I think I have one more slide, hopefully. Oh, that's it. I got my third.
There is one more slide.
There it is.
Go.
So, all of my work and her work partner together. So.
Yes, indeed. So because this is a roundtable, this really is about discussion, and it's discussion with everybody in the room. And we sort of got together and talked about the things that we thought about when we thought about this issue of how to sort of find a way to get things done when you don't have explicit time set aside or enough explicit time that's been set aside sort of officially. How do you deal with getting these projects done? And this is the list that we came up with. And we're delighted to talk about pros and cons of any of these, but I'm actually very curious to hear what you guys want to talk about. Like, what are the issues that you see happening with your work? And what strategies have you used, and what pitfalls have you come across?
And whoever shares the most positive or most negative story
Gets a
some
prize.
fish.
So we actually have a motivator to get people to share.
I actually wanted to bring an entire salmon from Pike's
She
Place,
did.
and
There was talk of throwing the fish.
I was ixnayed.
So nobody has a story?
I have kind of a question
Sure.
for maybe a starter. So I think leadership buy-in is that's the big one. But my experience has been, even when you get leadership buy-in and it's sort of top-down priorities, and you have senior staff on your side and everything, it can be almost harder to get sort of peer buy-in because we're all so overtaxed and
Yes.
understaffed and overworked, and it's almost, for me, the harder challenge is almost like everybody gets that it's important on a high level, and yes, we can do it, but then how have people's experiences been sort of communicating really effectively just with your peers and across departments and just at the actual practical, let's get it done level once everybody's already decided this is something we should do?
Yeah, and I think this is a good issue. And actually, this is what the Bright Future in Sales. That's actually exactly what we were talking about with that. It's selling your project to everybody that you encounter, not just the people outside who are going to use it, but the people within your institution. And it goes from the leadership buy-in, but it's also getting your team members, the people who are your colleagues, the people in other departments. And so I think a lot of it, you have to develop like your salesmanship skills in a lot of ways. And I think it becomes, we do a lot of bartering, like a lot. Like there is a lot of if you, I will. Can I help you with that project? You know what I could use is some help from you with this, but there's a lot of that goes on. But I think the first thing is always that selling thing. And I think, Lindsay, you had talked a lot about that.
Yeah, so being that I was the marketing department of one and this huge project came up, that it became really difficult to do day-to-day things. And speaking really positively about the things that needed to get done and asking others to do, like if somebody was like, hey, I'm pretty good at the Facebook, and I'm like, okay, can you post one thing a week, or and just flat out describing the why social media is good, and encouraging them that they are doing a good job, and really giving them the power to do what they want to do and what they do well. And it can be difficult to be like, I'm really, being like, I'm so tired, I've been working, blah, blah, blah. Can you take part of this? It's a difficult argument, but but understanding that when people group together, that so much more can get done. And it's a big sales pitch. And I am not a salesperson, so when you really believe in the project, it kind of speaks for itself. Or when you start to see the incremental changes, if you can just give a small portion of something to somebody. My big thing is not to have one person working on the project, because I was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and I'm a casualty. I burned out, and that's the main reason I quit a month ago. And I wish I were still there, but it was not sustainable. And maybe revisiting every quarter or every 6 months to see if everybody on the team is doing okay is pretty important. And if there is true leadership buy-in, that they will be like, this person is not doing well, or this and figuring out, all of this stuff is kind of like a little bit of a dance of figuring out, like, how far can I push, how far can I pull back, and it's
I think that's a really good second half of the question, and I would really love to hear what other people are doing. But I think we all probably have this experience too, that everybody who's in the museum is really passionate and wants to be there, and so we all are overworked and we have to get by, and it's hard. But I think my experience has been, everybody says yes too. So we're all trying to make it work and saying yes and figuring out how to get by, but we also keep saying yes when leadership has bought into something, even though we may not have all the resources we probably need. So when you keep saying yes, you get to that point where you're starting to burn out. And I guess, how does everybody deal with the idea of scalability, and if you are going to do something, sort of where's the threshold? Like how much going to be?
And when to change the project,
right.
And when to be like, well, this part of the project just can't happen right now. We'll put it into a different phase. Like, the flexibility needs to be there. And most digital projects are a moving target anyway. But knowing that when you're in the planning process, to be flexible enough to know, like, this is getting way too big, let's scale it back and try to make these smaller goals that actually reach the public in a timely manner. It's hard.
And I think that's like when you're in the planning phase, I think it's really, really important to never marry any part of your project, because you have to be sort of okay with the idea that any piece of this could be the thing that doesn't get done. And that I think a lot of us, because we originate these projects, we fall in love with these projects, we want to spend the rest of our lives with these projects. and then so when some small piece of it is cut because it just isn't possible, because of staff, because of resources, because of whatever, that, it's just like tremendous tragedy. I think you have to sort of figure out, like, which are the things that absolutely cannot go away, and then everything else you have to be prepared to let go of. And, I also think, one of the things about trying to figure out how to get other people to help, that for me is actually, it took me kind of a painfully long time to figure this out, is that I think because we think about like, here is my project, and my project requires A, B, C, and D to get done. So I need to find someone to be able to do D, because I will do A, B, and C. But you may not have anyone in your organization or on your team who's able to do D. And then that's when it's good to remember, right, I actually have that other full-time job that I'm doing. So maybe what I need is for somebody to do some piece of that thing rather than this project. And to think of all of the things that you're doing as movable. So that, and it took me like a really long time to figure that out, because I kept thinking, I need someone to do this piece of this project, when really what I needed was for someone to just take something away from me, you know? And so it doesn't have to be the thing from that project. If it's another chunk of time that you can give to somebody else, then you can go and work on that. So
I think another key component of leadership buy-in too is not just to allow you to do a new thing, to keep saying yes. It's really to allow you to say no to something.
Right.
Like a real leadership buy-in
Yes.
will say, that's a great idea. You can let this go to make that wonderful.
I mean, sorry.
No.
I mean, how many people are so honest with their leaders to say that?
Right.
I mean, it's hard to have that honesty. At least in our institution, we spend quite a lot of time with the leadership because of the scale of our project. And I, for a long time, thought leadership buy-in was let them say whatever I'm doing is good. Like, right? That's what I want. I want them to like me. And then I realized that what I really needed was to have the ability to say, this is not working, or I cannot work like this. You know, those kinds of things. And that was really scary. I mean, it's really scary to walk into your, bi-weekly meeting with your supervisor and say, listen, I'm done. I've hit the wall. But it's a lot less scary once you've said it. Like once you've said it, you can't unsay it. Like, it's not like all of a sudden, woo, I feel great now.
We're all good, actually.
Woo, that's wonderful. But it is, but then once you say that, it's out there. And then it changes the way that they think about the projects they hand you. And then you also, I would say you don't say that without saying, and here is my plan for exactly what Chad said. This is what can't happen anymore. Or this is what this person maybe could do. Or this is what maybe you could do if you have a leader who's that strong. I mean, isn't that's part of it?
Right. And then you get to the point where you're having a genuine conversation about priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the things that can get done, should get done. Which of these are most important? I have 8 things. I can do 5. You pick them.
yes. Hey, Josh.
I just wanted to chip in a little bit about university partnerships, and that we do a
Yes.
lot of university partnerships. But one of the, and I encourage everyone here, if you're not already, to engage universities. But be sure that you forewarn your staff regarding deliverables that you're not working with a vendor. So they may get an F and you may get nothing. And we've been really fortunate, like 4 of the 5 partnerships that we've done have been really successful, and one was just total crap. And the kid got a bad grade. And you have to it was hard, I think, for people at my museum to sort of swallow, oh, well, I guess that project's not done. We have to figure out another way to do it. But so I think it's something to explore if you're not already doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think that sort of goes to the idea of managing expectations. And, I think all of us have had pretty extensive experience with interns. I know the Mattress Factory has university partnerships. We have university partnerships. They're not a vendor thing is actually really, really important. And it's important, on the one hand, to make sure that, everyone in your organization is aware that you can't put the same demands or have the same expectations. But even on a smaller scale, when you have, interns who are working on things, there's both managing your own expectations, like what am I going to get out of having this person here? What can I give them that they might actually be able to do? How much work is it going to be for me to have this intern here? And there's some of these things you have no control over, right? Like you have an interview with them and they seem awesome, and then they show up and they're kind of not as awesome as you thought. and then you're like, oh no, because you have to spend, time figuring out like, what can I give this person? And even when they're great, you still have to figure out, I have to sit down and figure out what project I can give them. I have to check in with them every week and make sure that, so there's a certain amount, it's not like a magic bullet. It's not like magic free labor, you know, like there is a certain price that gets paid and it's in the amount of time that goes into it. But I think also managing the expectations of interns and volunteers and people that help you so that they are aware and understand what's going to happen with what they give you. You know, that they don't, you know, if you have them writing things, they need to understand that this may go through many, many, many edits and look absolutely nothing like what you gave me when it goes out into the public, so that there's not disappointment on their part of like, but the thing that I worked on isn't where I thought it was going to be. So, I mean, there's a lot of that goes into it as well. So, I know you've had
Yeah, so the past couple of years I've partnered, I'm from Pittsburgh, so there's Carnegie Mellon, which is a great resource, and I partnered with the Human Computer Interaction Institute, and they can do a whole bunch of stuff that I have no idea about. So for the past 2 springs, the first spring, they grouped me with a team of 5 senior undergrad students, and they have to connect for us and created a walkable gallery, because we were thinking, you know, how do we make this stuff travel if it's site specific? It can't travel. So it's kind of, you know, digitally recreating that. And the project is still a prototype and it might not go anywhere, but it was really great to get feedback from, because we brought it into the museum and tested it, of course, and figuring out if it would work. Because a lot of people are like, well, we don't even need this because we could just see this on a screen. What's the difference between me pretending I'm walking versus just going through, you know, a really large screen? And that was valuable instead of, because I was, sometimes at these conferences you get shown very, very pretty large things that are like,
Are you talking about me?
maybe like your project. But like the 360 degree like augmented reality kind of things you can walk into, like I was like, oh man, that'd be so great. And so I tried it and people are like, this isn't really that great, that's not going to work for our specific institution. And it was good to know that it was figured out with a quick prototype rather than pouring millions of dollars into something. Mm-hmm. And then this past spring, I partnered with a different class who were also seniors in this Human Computer Interaction Institute, and they started building a mobile app for the Mattress Factory, because we currently have a really old website that still works pretty well, but definitely not on any smaller devices than a huge computer. And I'm actually still, even though I'm not at the Mattress Factory anymore, I'm still working on that project. That it's about 90% done, which is great. And I was fortunate enough to get teamed up with a Google engineer in Mountain View. They have, so those who don't know, that Google offers, I think it's Google Serve 20, and it's like a volunteer program. I think you guys are you guys doing that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Warhol.
We signed up for it.
Oh, you signed up for it, you haven't gotten somebody yet?
Not yet, we started the project.
Yeah, so I'm teamed up with somebody at Mountain View, and we just do video conferencing and figure out what needs to be done next, which is great because he's a software engineer and I don't know anything about coding. So there's other partnerships and other ways to do more than you think you can. The Mattress Factory has a full-time staff of 12. So being able to do bigger things that we wouldn't normally be able to do is really great when you reach out.
Chad, can you talk a little bit about your core digital group and how you identified them? And then also, do you see any ripple effects branching out to people who may not be digital wanting to participate?
Yes, yeah. It started as we now meet fairly often. It started as a very ad hoc group. So I picked up the 3 or 4 people that were helping me already with social media. We had some people in the education department. My role is in the marketing department officially. And I have no digital staff under me. So that means that I have to spread out and see who I can get.
Like a virus.
I'm totally I'm a friendly virus. So I do. I spread out among other departments, and both through personal relationships and digital projects that I've worked with people, I've kind of been able to identify those who are interested, capable, digital native type folks who are willing and would be doing this kind of stuff anyway. Brought those people together. Right now, it started as a group of about 6 of us, and now there are 8 to 10 that kind of meet together. We have social events together, meet for coffee. We call our meetings unmeetings because we work in an institution that's all about meetings, and so I want this to be a group, at least in name, that is more casual. When we first started meeting, I would call the meetings basically through my Twitter account and say, we're meeting at the coffee bar in West Building, Friday, come by if you can. So even then, I mean, it's awful to say, but it sounded like a secret society. In some respects, it was at that point, but it's grown, and now people do come up to me and say, I heard about these ideas you had, and how can we tap into that, and can I come to the meeting, and that sort of thing. So now it's become more of a kind of official group, and that was very important, even for these short-term projects, to where I had a group where I could email immediately and say, just that afternoon, what do you guys think about this? Try this out. We're just gonna, take half an hour to go around the permanent collection, find these images, report back. And because I had, we had been a group and had those meetings, I had kind of laid the groundwork for that sort of project. And it's the kind of thing now where, I feel like I can go to those people, some of whom are in membership or in development, with our parks department, and say, there's this digital thing that I'm really interested in. What do you think about that? And that's how those partnerships can start. So I think it was a good approach and really fit our institution really well. But yeah, it's a matter of getting to know people. It's boots on the ground. It's being open and available to people. So when somebody drops by your cube and says, "What's this new thing I hear about Pinterest? What's going on?" It's putting down what you're doing and saying, "Let's talk."
It makes me think of I get a little help from my friends. I feel like for us, we have 2 kinds of those kind of groups. We have the ones that are because we have personal relationships. They always bring in cookies. I bring them things. I know I know that he really loves coffee, whatever. And you talk to them, you know things about them. You know that they actually are secretly bloggers. They want to be writers. They want to be photographers. And those relationships, I think, really help you because you know exactly how they can help you, right? That person is a writer, and they would really want to help with the blog. That person is the most insane editor ever. She can make anything into 140 characters, and those are awesome things to know about people because it connects to what they really care about.
Right.
And in some ways, I feel like you get more out of it. I know that I have done I will do this for you if you do this for me. I am one of the people who submits to our museum blog. And I do it because I know I'll get advertising from my program. It's like I get this, you get this, fine. And I do it, but it's not something that's not necessarily, I'm sorry I'm outing myself, but not necessarily a labor of love all the time. It's something I do. But then if somebody says, oh, we're coming up with this project, I want to figure out all of the ghosts in the museum, can you come in an hour? I will show up.
Right.
Because that person has really, she's the person who I know loves this kind of cookie, and she knows I love coffee. And
Right.
those personal relationships are really essential.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's a great example too, because once if I give these guys a challenge, the next week they're going to have their own project, an education-related project or this or that, where they're going to ask for volunteers, and you bet I'm going to be there. I've got to be there.
So no one has attempted to get the fish yet. Somebody's got to have a fish-worthy story. even with incentives. Wow.
I think too, kind of as a kind of melding these two questions in terms of leadership buy-in and the identifying talent in your staff. We've gotten to the point too, and this is where it gets kind of fun and interesting, where leadership in my institution has kind of said, "Oh, I've heard you've been doing this thing, and it's very cool. People are excited about it. I've heard about it." It opens the door for me to say, "Yeah, it's very cool." And you know what the next step is? The next step is that to make this real, since I don't have a digital staff, to make this real, we're going to have to think about these people's, like the next step is to think about these people's work plans. And to put a digital component in their work plan is a fantastic idea, and one that's going to grow this thing, so that they will be able to, and their boss, their director will be able to say, you know, we sign off on this. It's okay for you to spend, you know, half a day a week, 1 day a week to do these projects, and it's legit, and don't feel like you have to do this on your free time. Yeah.
Well, it's also scale of projects sometimes for me. So, I mean, it sounds like those weren't the biggest projects
No.
in your portfolio. And we have something where we started an Instagram bingo for teens. And it was just something we came up with, we were thinking about it. And then we have a teen kind of group that's part of our community, and they're running around with iPads taking pictures. And the deputy director happened to see them. And he said, I saw this thing, Instagram, somebody's doing bingo out there.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I know, those are our students. And it was like that kind of random word of mouth, but I capitalized on it. But I was able to do that because nobody cared about what I was doing, frankly,
Right.
on that project. Whereas on my large-scale project, where we have that room that I showed you, where we put in all this CapEx, where we have a giant interactive wall, I don't have that freedom.
Right.
And for me, actually, part of being able to do that other job that really drains me sometimes is to be able to do those fun jobs. And then when leadership catches that, then it's like, yeah, see, you see, like we're doing fun things because nobody cared and you let me do that.
Right. And those small projects too. I mean, especially as you're developing a cohort of interested staff, gets people excited. So for us, it was almost a great step along a progression. Who knows where it's going to go, but to be able to have those small projects to allow people to share and take part and have something to talk about among their own staff is so important, that we could show something within the space of a week that look at this cool thing we did. I think that there's a real value to those small, short projects, even as a prelude to something bigger.
Absolutely. Well, the thing about small projects to me also is that you get to feel some rewards. I mean, that's like part of it for workload. I think that another thing you can do is balance this. The project that Jennifer and I have been working on has been, in process in its first iteration in 2001. I've been working on this project since 2001. It opens in 2012, and I think there's other people who've been on projects that have been like that. We've had many, many iterations. We've had 5 directors, 6 iterations. And to kind of make it through that, I've had 100,000, I can't even think of how many different little projects. And having that short lifespan of a project means that you actually can succeed in something. Because feeling good about yourself, and I know like this is not exactly a self-help therapy session, but feeling good about something you've accomplished is going to help you get back to that thing you don't love doing, or maybe that's burned you out a little. I think having a balance is important.
That was something that you had brought up, this idea that, you have to have fun. And if the big project that you're working on is currently not a thing that you're having fun with, you kind of have to come up with other ways to make it fun, because otherwise you just do get burnt out, because then it just becomes the big project that you're working on and it's kind of drudgery. And there are times when you feel overwhelmed and you feel like I can't possibly add something, even if it's a small little project that I think is going to be fun. I just can't kind of face the idea of doing it. And I think those are the moments when it's really important to kind of pull back and say, what can I not do this week so that I can spend an hour doing this other thing, so that I don't get to the end of the week and think, I don't want to go back. Like I just can't face the project. So I think it actually is really important to find those in like little micro projects that you do that are like labors of love, but they don't have a lot of labor. So they have to be small enough that they're not actually labors of love. So.
We've got kind of a story.
Oh, good.
Yay!
Yay! First guy!
One learning that I've had, as you get more busy, you have to out-task some
Yes.
things to other people. And probably my biggest problem is giving control over to
Yeah.
non-technical people. And especially the one day that always sticks in my mind probably for the rest of my life is when the PR manager comes over to my desk and says, I don't know where the collections area of the website went. Turns out she accidentally deleted it. So thankfully, we had a backup, get it up and running within an hour or so. But that's, to me, that learning is trying the non-technical people, train them well, do the same type of task all the time. Like this person does emails only. This person does like events only. And if it goes beyond that, check with me or really make sure you know what you're doing kind of thing. So, and that's always been a kind of a struggle with people because I think as more and more people get iPads and more familiar with technology, they think they're more comfortable. I think so.
Yeah.
It's just something that I've had to keep in the back of my mind all the time. I think. So.
That actually made me feel a little sick to my stomach.
I need a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, and that's actually, that's a really great story. I think it's actually very much connected to what we were thinking about in terms of communications and making sure that, there's a lot of, that everyone understands what's going on and, where they are, what their role in the project is, what other people's role in the project is, what, I think it's good to have all sorts of information about stuff so that maybe we can avoid really scary scenarios like that. That was good.
My story does not beat that story, but
That's a hard one to beat.
we recently opened a new exhibition in conjunction with a film and video piece, and our film and video curators were very adamant in being involved in every part of the process, including the initial tests with random guests in the galleries, and they would often interrupt the process, telling you're doing it wrong, or you're pressing the wrong button and that sort of thing, which was a very, very trying time for me to be professional in front of a museum guest, but also the curator. So I think I totally agree that you really need to sort of do a good job in explaining why X process needs to happen X way, especially when a curator wants to be involved in every part of it. Maybe you don't need to be there to see what button they press. That has nothing to do with, the aesthetic experience or whatever.
Well, that also makes me think, for those of us in institutions where we have exhibitions, and so things are exhibition driven, I also sometimes think the exhibition will close. It will go to another institution and I will be free of this person who is micromanaging me. Or, even if it's somebody in your institution, they will let up because there is an end point at some point. And I used to sometimes, especially when I was doing exhibition programming, and if you had that kind of thing, we had a number of exhibitions where we'd have interactives that were part of it. And this was the only thing they were thinking about. And you were, of course, thinking, you're thinking about 15 other interactives or possible technology things that I think, oh, thank God, I just have to make it to May. If I can make it to May, then we're good. But having an endpoint for me has been very helpful.
Yeah. I think on this large project that we're working on, it now has a clear endpoint. And so I think there is a lot of that. We just got to get to there.
So what are you working on after that?
Honestly, it's
launching next month, right?
it's going to have its public launch in January. So, I think, long term, we have to work on things like how are we going to maintain it? How are we going to keep it up? How are we going to add new content? How are we going to refresh it? So, I think there are things that are going to be going on after that. But the third week in January may just be nap time.
For you, but for me, so I do programming as well. So for me, that's when I continue to get excited. It's just a different kind of thing. I think the one thing that's interesting also is trying to empower the people who are in your team. And so I try really hard because in my team I have both people who work on content that's specifically targeted for interactives, and then people who then work with visitors to work with those interactives. And so, having them both talk to each other and having them actually do parts of each other's jobs so that we're all part of this has been really helpful. So there isn't an end point in that way. It just changes the way that our flow is and what we do and our priorities, which is nice because then you have something new to look forward to.
And of course, we have new galleries that are coming online too, so there's that.
Come on, regale us with your terrible workload stories.
Who is actually managing a digital project? Anybody? How many? That's like,
A lot of people.
yeah, most people in here.
In
Is
the
it
Red
going
Scarf
well?
Brigade.
Is there a general it's going well or going not
We
so
have
well?
a story.
I have a story. I don't want it. It's not a therapy group, and I don't want to complain.
No, this is actually
That's a good way to
therapy.
start
Like,
therapy. Come on.
that's how I started.
There's 5 chairs here. It could be like a couch.
I manage a project at the South Australian Museum to digitise the entomology collection using a team of volunteers. It's been going on for about 18 months now, and I set up the equipment, standards, methods of delivery to the net, that sort of thing, and recruiting and managing and training the volunteers. And I find repeatedly people do not understand that once the volunteers are up and running, they're not a set and forget thing. And I don't know whether it's the same in the States, but in Australia, when you are applying for government grant funding and things like that, one of the things you often need to contribute an in-kind contribution of funds, but that can be
Volunteer hours.
volunteer hours. So it gets put onto almost everything that we then do. So then my project is coming to a certain stage where I can take on other things, and so my next project also has more volunteer hours that we need to contribute to the project, and the snowballing effect of too many people expecting that volunteers can run themselves. And yes, so it's a bit of a perfect storm of sort of nasty project things. Our project is physically isolated as a separate building from the main part of the museum, from the scientists that we work with, because there was no space for us to do it. There's open hostility towards some of the digital projects, and that's a thing as well. So it's a fun experience, but I like to talk about the small project thing, and I was going to mention that I recently spoke at the Museums Australia conference about what I'm working on is quite a big project, a big entomology collection to get done, but my volunteers and I joke about the fact that we've become obsessed with celebrating the small wins, that the small projects can be just little parts of the big project. So we're photographing holotypes in our manted collection. There are 14 manted holotypes, so we did all 14, and that was something to celebrate. And so we finished an order of insects, and so it's that internal PR for the people who are sceptical about our project within the organisation. It's a little win that we can publicise on Twitter to our users and visitors, but it's also good for the volunteers to celebrate something like that. They've managed to photograph that whole order of insects, which is a grand 14, and then they move on to the beetles, which is 3,000. So the small projects don't necessarily need to be in addition to or on the side of your big project. The big project is ongoing, but it can be a series of.
That's right.
That's a good point.
That's a great.
Or like, can there be little projects built in within the big project? Like, I wish there were more of that for the big project I'm coming off of, just because it was like, we were literally just staring at thousands of collections database fields, and it's like, metadata, and if there were being like, okay, we're gonna do this with the images, or if there were smaller little goalposts to be like, I made it there, and then, being able to split it up that way rather than like, fix the world. That's at celebrating the small wins, I think, is why a lot of projects succeed.
And it's gaming, like gamifying or something.
Yeah.
Right.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
I'm going to beat my, I'll get that bit done quicker than I'm planning to, or I will, do this bit better than
But that's something that connects to one that you brought up.
Right, and one in a couple different ways too. Well, we've been, our big projects are we're thinking about mobile technology and the mobile collection, the online collection, and a new main site that has these social streams kind of flowing through it, both from visitors and from our own social channels. So something like the gathering the Instagram photos from on site is a great primer for us, to show staff and kind of stakeholders the value of that and how fun it is to see all these pictures taken on site by visitors. But also, from a technical side, helps me to see, okay, these are the tools I have, these are the APIs I can take advantage of, and these are the tags and sources that I'll be needing to draw from. This is super valuable, and it's fun that using kind of off-the-shelf tools, I can gain that knowledge pretty quickly, and put it up there, show it, and be on the path to something bigger, and it's really valuable. And kind of the second thought I had for that is the core group of digital people that we have at the museum, I firmly believe is on the path to bigger and better things. So if you think of whatever that bigger and better thing is as a huge project, these little projects, these one afternoon, half hour of your time projects are little milestones on the way to that. They're bringing a team together, they're getting people excited, and they're showing off, what a small group of digital interested staff can do, and preparing for the future.
Go ahead. Sorry, I can't see your name tag.
I'm Sarah. I've actually just started a position at Brooklyn Academy of Music. I'm a digital project archivist and I was just, the question that I had, because I'm starting up this project, is of the panel and of the group, is anyone using project management software, and what are your experiences with it? Because I have some that's recommended to me, and one of the terms in it is milestones, and I keep hearing milestones mentioned, and I wonder if anyone's actually...
Benchmarks.
Yeah, I tend to get skeptical of stuff like that, so I just wonder if people have found it useful if you are using something like that.
We actually just implemented Basecamp, and our IT department was very much against it, so our director just said, do it, and tell them what. But it's actually really interesting because it's really gotten the entire, it's something that really kind of kicks our whole organization in the pants to get things done, because we have a problem where we have a lot of public programs, and there's sort of a funnel effect where the folks who engage the external publics, the web, marketing, social media, it's a huge workflow funnel, and everything gets stuck, and we're often waiting for assets or whatever, and it's crazy on us. And then the people who create the programs, it's relatively easy for them. So by implementing, we've made templates, so it's super simple for a curator to go in, 6-month template for a program, enter your stuff, and then they have to-dos, they check every day. It's something we've gotten into. It was really hard to get started on it, and there was a learning curve, but for staff, but it's really helping. Like, there's been a real kind of change in productivity, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I would have to second Basecamp. At the Mattress Factory, we just worked off of like an Excel spreadsheet, which was just easy to not open. And, at the university I'm working at now, I'm helping build a new website for the entire university, and there's just 2 of us with a couple outside consultants, and we're using Basecamp, and I'm really impressed. It's only been a month, but I will probably use it for every large digital project I'm in, because you can, you probably already know how you can upload the assets and make sure people assign those to-do lists and stuff like that. So it's nice too, because it stays checked off and crossed off, and you're like, I did all that. So yeah, I like Basecamp.
Can I ask you, because we actually did have a project management, I can't even remember what we used, but there's a lot of tending to it, that we felt like there was a lot of taking care of it and paying attention to it, and it became another part of us, and we were already sort of dysfunctional as it was, and I didn't need another dysfunctional person who was telling me, you didn't do this task, you know what I mean? I didn't, so it became a little challenging, but we didn't use Basecamp, and I honestly don't remember what we did.
I'm also a huge list maker, so it works, for my kind of style, and just being able to see what you have done, what's coming up, and having that bigger view of the project broken down into tiny bits. It's like any kind of project management. is helpful.
I think that's actually a good point. So we have a lot of visual timelines. We're I'm from an arts organization, so we do a lot of that. And I think one of the challenges I find on this sort of project management thing is that we have people on the team who come from different disciplines, and they are different kind of thinkers. And we have the split, like the split of the list makers and the visual timeline folk. And there is a woman on our team who do not mess with her spreadsheets. She will go so crazy ninja on you, you don't even know. And then there's like a whole group of people who only believe in visual timelines. And it's an interesting thing to try to meld those two kinds of folk. And what we end up doing is having both.
Yeah.
And then maintaining both. Right, which is suboptimal.
Well, at least there are timelines. Having timelines is important.
Another that we've used is called Asana, which is really good at lists and shared lists and that sort of thing. It's a free solution.
I'll just add that I'm from Children's Museum in Pittsburgh. We just launched a new website, and communication between our developer and us, we used Basecamp, and it really helped a lot. Everyone has lots of projects, and like it's really nice to be able to go to one place and just look at the messages rather than like you're in your inbox and you have all these distractions in your inbox, like 10 different projects, but you can just go there and do the work and then get out of it. So in that aspect, it really helped us.
Pretty glad we're using Basecamp.
Are you using Basecamp?
You're like, and I hate it.
Right.
I haven't really even used it yet.
Yeah.
It's very new.
Any other stories?
I do have a bit of a story. But
Good.
I'm from a different group of individuals than most of the people in this room. I'm actually on the IT infrastructure side. So it's not so much that I'm burdened with a whole bunch of projects, it's that operations and continuing operations trumps anything that I try to do.
Yeah.
Now, this is different from the story, but I had to spend a 30-hour day at work one day, which cost me 3 days of work. And it was because our central core switch died. And although I'm the storage virtualization guy, the network guy was on paternity leave for 6 months. So, and it's not so important that that happened. It's just 30 hours worth of work ended up as 3 days worth of gap. And so all of a sudden, I wasn't available for anything for that 3 days. Now, further this, we're in a storage project, and it's so far run about 1.25 years. Now, there's two problems with that. One, technology is changing. The second one is I'm now only left with 87 gigs of undimensioned disk space on our NAS server, and that's all it supports the whole organization's storage structure. So my boss and I are working very diligently, and the museum corporation I work for, Science and Technology in Ottawa, is actually very forgiving, but unfortunately, the other department managers aren't necessarily. So we're doing everything we can, but we are stuck in a position where we don't know how long it's going to be, especially now since in polling the other departments to try and find out what data sits in places we have no clue about, or what projects may generate data, it's extremely slow to get answers. So project management is fine, but it really suffers when actually having to divvy up time between operations and project management.
Yeah.
So I don't know how long that 87 gigs is going to last.
That's so little.
Not long
I know,
enough.
it's-
Whatever. Definitely not long enough.
I mean, have you found that communication, have you found, what are the ways that have you had any successes in getting communication from those other managers?
Oh, we have had successes, but they're extremely unskilled in understanding the reasons why this is happening. Oh, sorry, yes. Part of this also comes from the fact that we're working towards bringing up a digital asset manager where we're looking at least 30 terabytes of data that could be plopped immediately on me. So we're really trying to communicate, and the communications is getting through, but we still have people on the other end that don't quite understand the real importance of all this stuff. And so they've got their own job to do and their own projects they're pursuing. And the digital asset project is a project they're pursuing, but finding out what data they've got sitting at all their people's zip drives, which you can't get back anymore, CD-ROMs, even projects where they're looking at digitizing 100,000 photographs from the aviation collection. All this stuff just pulls people's attention away from our needs, which are going to become much more critical than theirs very shortly. And so the infrastructure side tends to suffer when other departments have projects that tunnel vision seems to lock them onto.
I mean, talking about servers isn't sexy, and it's hard, and it's, I'm coming from a place that's really small, so it was easy to just, the grant writer was literally on my same floor, and I was like, no, you really need to set aside $8,000, for a server, a mirror server, like you really, she's like, $8,000, can't we just get some hard drives, and like explaining that,
It's actually
just, I mean, that explaining that all of their hard, somehow to get them to be like, all the hard work that you're doing, to be able, to capture that for longer than the next year is very important. And, knowing that technology is moving so quickly, and it is hard, and I don't know if, maybe you should print up a few horror stories, like what GoDaddy went down, a month ago or whatever, and that's like, how many stores lost, what I think they gave all their customers, like a free month or something sad.
Right.
But it's like, I'm sorry, they just lost millions and millions, a lot of companies lost millions of dollars of revenue. And maybe printing up a few horror stories for your grant writer and or, executive directors or whatever, because it's so important. I mean, it's the foundation. So.
And yet people see it as a way to divert funds away from what they really need to do.
I think that's where it comes back to the leadership behind them, because I know we have the same issue. So when you're getting into digital projects, everything really truly becomes interdepartmental. But it's like you have your job to maintain all of the information systems, but the digital asset manager now has a job to digitize 100,000 things. So you start butting heads like this because everybody's just trying to do what the institution wants them to do. And I know we run into the same problem too. And I feel like that's the point where you have to figure out how to get somebody at the top to say, this is what we're committing to doing, and we're going to give you the funds to make it possible and make it happen. But getting to that point, trying to get to the point where everybody at top is passionate the same way you're passionate about what you're doing, but in a way that lets you do your job without stepping on the toes of all of your employees, I feel like can be really difficult.
And there's a certain level of education that's sometimes hard to get through to people because they're inundated with the buzzwords out there, so they think they understand your profession. We ran into, our donor software, our development departments hit and fired, move it to the cloud. And I turned around to the first meeting that they announced, we're moving it to the cloud, without ever talking to me about it, as being their IT manager. We're gonna move this to the cloud. Can you do without your donor software for 3 days? And they were like, what are you talking about? Well, Donor Perfect went down for 3 days last week because they got hit by someone who stole their URL. Didn't touch the data, but simply stole their URL. And they're like, wow, they really? I'm like, yeah. And so none of their people who were in the cloud had access. If it's on our server, we still have access to it. And so they had to completely start rethinking the project, and I started giving them some guidelines. This is what you want to think about to rethink the project and go back to square one on this. Don't just grab onto the buzzword and jump towards it.
And the communications are working fairly well, but again, sexy takes the attention.
Well, I think sometimes it's about partnering with that. It's like being the, the boyfriend or something. We're not in the project that we're working on. There's a lot of infrastructural needs. So we've had to put in all this, new wayfinding into our building. We've had crazy server changes and increases. And one thing that's really good is that everyone on the team knows that we actually really need those guys. I have to tell you, I have not just once, but many, many times bought our server guy cookies. I think that's back to personal relationships. But the way that they were going to get what they needed for actually actually changes beyond our project, were to partner with our project, because our project happened to be the sexiest thing in the building. And it couldn't happen without those changes. And so sometimes it is about finding a good person who can take part of it, and I don't know that they'll take all of it, but maybe they take part of it. And that increases your profile as well. Because we now, I mean, we do say, oh, thank God for Bob and, all those guys, and we had all these infrastructural changes, and I just said it in a presentation yesterday. And it's because it was part of this.
Yeah. So you need to find a sexy project to like hit your pony up to.
Find a sexy project.
And also, don't get me wrong, but there is a real legacy at our organization of informatics passion.
Yeah.
And so it's not impossible, but it's easier with new staff than it is with old staff to convince them there's real reasons why they should talk to us.
Right.
Then make sure all the new staff is your ally, because they'll, eventually, I don't know.
Eventually they will be the staff.
I've got binoculars out looking for the agent within the corporation, looking to see who's going to retire soon and who I should be actually talking to. But it's not easy, and everyone faces a whole bunch of problems when it comes to real communications and understanding the difficulties of others.
Yeah.
Or maybe also understanding not knowing that I don't understand. Like, I don't really understand what our infrastructure guys do. I know why it's important. I mean, I think like telling them what's important is the part that they need to understand, people in my position, so that we will work together to get the money so both of us can do it. Because I can't really, it's just not what I do. But I know it's important that he does it. So I think there's
I was going to say one thing that we found helpful is the High Museum of Art that I work for is part of the Woodruff Art Center, which includes the Atlanta Symphony. There's a larger theater and some other outreach organizations all under the same umbrella. And we all share the same IT department, which is about a fourth of the size of what it should be, probably. But one thing that we've started, I think, this past spring is a technology leadership council, where it included kind of the most technical type of people from each of the divisions, along with the marketing heads of each of the divisions. And once a month, we all get in a room and we look at kind of the IT tasks that are facing not only each division, but also the organization as a whole. And so that allows us to kind of prioritize projects a little bit. So, maybe the symphony might want choose your own seat type of functionality sooner rather than later, but we need to be PCI compliant, and that trumps everything else. So that kind of gives a little more transparency, I think, to everything, which is useful for everybody to kind of see and then work through. And so you've got the business side and you've got the IT side, and they're all kind of working together a little bit.
And I think that like, even though what you're dealing with are multiple organizations sort of under the same umbrella, it kind of works the same even when you're only dealing with one organization, because departments can sometimes act as though they're different organizations, and sort of getting like, I think there's a lot of getting everybody in the room and saying, we're all on the same team. And like, we all need to act like we're all on the same team. And so understanding that like, yes, for me and what I'm doing, this right here, this thing is the big priority. And so I need to have this happen. But in order for that to happen, there are actually other things that have to happen too that are priorities or non-priorities for other departments. So trying to figure out how to make it so that the big things for the organization are the priorities that happen rather than in those kind of pieces. And I think, this is like the tunnel vision thing where, we are all like, oh, this is my project and it's the most important thing ever, and we're all guilty of it, right? But like trying to make sure that we all remember like everybody else has one of those too. And so we all need to kind of get together and figure out what's the best thing for the whole organization and how do we get there. So.
And that's a real good point, is to not build up your own little silo and to make it part of the organization.
Definitely. All right, somebody's got to have a battle story.
In building on what she said, I come from a state library, and we're a library, we're an archive, and we're also the state museum. And they're very siloed. And each part of the organization thinks they're doing something totally separate. And I sit in the middle of these three groups. And I'm trying to convince people that, we're all doing the same thing, we're all parts of the same project. And trying to get the buy-in from all of the groups is really difficult because libraries don't really like museums. And, our museum guys don't really want to work with the library, and the archives are just kind of like the redheaded stepchild.
That's so true.
We're all doing the same thing. We all have the same end goals.
Right.
And so communication is really important, and demonstration. I found that the more I show the different parts of the organization
Yeah.
what they can do,
Mhm.
the more buy-in that I get.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
Hopefully, the big chiefs, our state librarian has, great vision for the future, and so I get great support from him.
I think that's something that certainly in the last year I've learned is that education is actually a big part of my job, staff education. And it's not one that I really imagined going into museum technology. And not necessarily one I've been trained in, but is a key component to let the other staff, not only let them know what the value of social media is for the organization or for the mission of the organization, or how the website runs from a back-end point of view, but also to get them interested and to see a bigger kind of digital picture. I think it's very valuable to have those talks, to sit down, to even have within your institution, a little luncheon lecture about a topic.
And one thing that I think from where I am, one thing that would be really useful to actually get from the more IT side would actually be sort of mini workshops. And like I don't have to know absolutely everything about how the back end works, but you know what? Like if I had a basic understanding of it, then later conversations might be easier. So like if somebody came back to me and was like, no, we totally can't do this crazy thing you want to do with your content. Like if there's no, and here's why, then I'm just sitting there like, grr, you're my enemy. Why
So wrong.
Why won't you?
That's why I'm on this panel.
we tend to, a lot more, we say, no but. Or yes. We want to do this. Yeah, we could do that. But it's going to take, and this is how it's going to happen, and this is what we're going to lose, and those kinds
Sure.
of things.
And I think those are great conversations, but seriously, if somebody part of this whole giant project that we're doing is that there's a CMS being built, there's, there's a lot of back end stuff that is going on, and actually what would be awesome for me is if somebody would sit down and do a half hour or an hour where we actually sat down and looked at show me the structure of the CMS so that I understand what you need. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to be prepared to go deal with it, but if I'm I may be able to understand a little bit more about what you're looking for and why it is that you come to me and say, I need this. Because sometimes it's that's the request Planet 9 from outer space. What are you talking about? And so it's hard for me to process what they're looking for. I may be able to sort of anticipate what you're looking for. I may at least understand why you're asking me for this. And then it doesn't feel so much wow, you have these unreasonable demands, because then I know why it's there. So, I actually think something like that, to me, that would be super helpful.
And one of the tricks with that too is also taking it from a textual base, which is what most IT guys are working with.
Sure.
And actually transferring it to something that's more graphic based.
Yes.
So that the general populace of the staff can understand it.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me think that part of it is also translation. The library comment was that really rang true because we have a very large art library as part of our institution and an archives. And so I felt very confident in working with librarians. These people I work with. We came up with projects together and we wrote an IMLS grant that involved putting high-speed internet in some of the outlying public libraries and doing distance learning. We have a very large distance learning program in our institution, and doing distance learning with those libraries and then creating so they could actually do distance learning, be content providers. And working out, I thought this is going to be okay. And then we started working with these librarians, and it was the most, because we had our IT people, their librarians, and us. And the museum people, we were like these crazy hippies who said, yes, we could do anything. And the librarians were like, no, you work within systems. And it brought our staff, we were like, what? We were so, we didn't even know what to do. We had never been so unliked before. And so, or at least we didn't know we had been that unliked. And, but some of the things that we learned was that our IT people would put up these sort of amazing graphics to explain whatever was going to happen. And they were things that required additional degrees to read. You know, like it'd be like this. I was like, you know, I describe, I could look at Jackson Pollock and see something, but this makes no sense to me. And so one of the things that we actually sat down and started doing was coming up ways to translate. So I'd say, okay, their IT guy was a guy named Dave who was very personable, and you know, we would sit and I'd be like, here's coffee. Tell me what you're trying to say with this. And maybe we could work together to translate it for everybody. And so it goes back to that empathy thing and like listening to them and hearing not the words that they're saying, but sometimes hearing the subtext of it or saying, wait, I don't understand what the heck you just said. I appreciate you just spoke for 10 minutes, but I have no idea about any of it. Can you start again with language maybe I'd understand? And I mean, that's part of it. It's just, you're not speaking the same language.
I think, storytelling.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So the project I was working on was just getting trying to get our collections online, and people not understanding certain things like, you know, how big does our server need to be? And so we're a small staff and we have a million things to do. So we're not into extra meetings. What we did is I partnered with our archivist, and every week we dragged something out of the archives and showed and be like, this is the thing that we want to make sure people know exists. Like the Mattress Factory was the first museum in the US to show something from Damien Hirst. So we have a bag, and it had to do with, I'm sure you can, it's giant white canvases and flies poop. And so we actually have bags of crushed fly bodies that we saved. But the thing is, that's almost the most interesting part of that installation, and bringing that to the staff meeting, be like, here, we got this it's a Ziploc bag of fly dust, and being like, this is the thing that we actually want to put out there so people, you know, digitally, so people know the parts of this installation. And so we would, once a week, we would just spend 5 minutes showing the rest of the staff, be like, this is, you know, Kusama's chair that we have that she sat in for her big exhibition in '96. Like, this is the chair. We want to make sure people know that this is the chair that she sat in here in Pittsburgh. And so that whole storytelling and just general education to be like, instead of like, here's this crazy database we're building that nobody really cares about, and being like,
show you all the fields.
Let me show you all the fields is the worst meeting ever. Don't do that to me, please. I don't want that. Okay. Sarah, right?
Yeah, and I'm just responding. Did you really get a really bad reaction from all the librarians? Because I feel like a lot of archivists are librarians. I'm just defending my people.
You know what I think for us is, so that these were librarians who are not part of our institution. So these were librarians who were part of the public system. And you know what the part of it was, actually, that's a whole different talk, but that actually had to do with leadership buy-in. So the head of their institution signed them up for this project. Without telling them, because she wanted, and this goes back to like, how do you get grants? She wanted the technology. The programming is how they got the grant. And so the librarians were stuck with us. I mean, we were like the craziest family to marry. Like, we were the worst in-laws you could ever marry into for them, because they didn't want to be married to us. I think that I've seen them since, and we've worked together, and I mean, it's all fine now. This was many, many years ago. But when that's part of it, like, you know, staff buy-in or, you know, working with your staff. If you ever walk into your team's meeting and be like, hey, in an hour you're going to have to do this, they're not going to want to do it. But if you bring them along or say, hey, you know, and that's going back to storytelling. For when we raise money, we have these annual fund letters that say, oh, here's, you know, Dean Yoder, he's a wonderful conservator. This is this beautiful painting we wish we could conserve. It's, you know, we need money. And we do that to the public, or we do that to donors, but we don't do it internally.
We sort of forget we have to do it internally.
Right. And so that person did not do that with her staff. And so they were sort of, we had this first meeting, and they were sort of like, what? We're doing what? And it was just, there was a lot of sort of additional factors to it. But there was a real cultural difference. I mean, there were also cultural differences. They were union staff. Our librarians are not union staff. They had certain rules about visitors and when students were allowed in the space. We would let you in at any time. They, on the opposite hand, really believed in circulation and touching things and taking things out of space, and we were like, please don't touch our stuff. You know what I mean? So we had like all of these. It was comical, and I think you had a comment.
Librarians here, yes. It can be hard, but
So can we?
sorry about that.
No, we can be nuts.
You know, like, 'cause
I said
really-
we're nuts. I mean, it's not like I'm.
But I mean, you know, it's like you want to see it. Come into to the gallery and try to touch something, and then watch what happens.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I love what you were saying about translating, because it is true, like different kinds of libraries, we don't talk to it very well. But I love the idea of translation, because as somebody who gets super excited about metadata and controlled vocabularies and authority control and all this stuff, when you're trying to get when you're trying to get other people passionate about a project you're working on, and you drop like 27 acronyms in one paragraph, it is really hard to communicate. And I found that one thing that I've learned that's been really successful in managing a lot of the digital projects we do is that if I go, even if I just sit down with like our grant writer or a friend in development or something, and if I can do the staff education that it takes to get that person to understand what I'm doing so that they could sell my project to a donor or something, then she can say it back to me. Like, I feel like that exercise is really, really, really helpful if I go in and say, you know, let's talk about it, I'm gonna get you passionate about it, and then say, if you were selling this to someone, you know, if you wanted somebody to give me $500,000 to work on this project, what did you glean from that? What made you passionate about it? How did you take it back? And the way they can translate it back to me, it's like, oh, okay, this is how I should be talking to the board. This is how I need to talk to the president. Like, this is how I need to do this kind of communication, because it doesn't matter how pumped up I am about like AET or LCSH or any of these things, like, that doesn't mean anything. So I think the point of translation is really, really important. And it's not that hard to like kick that ball back and forth and get to a point where I understand my job better when somebody says it back to me sometimes.
And remembering that not everybody knows what you're talking about. Just being able, because I'm like, oh yeah, you know, this open source database that has an API and, you know, it's collective access and blah, 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 built the dumb core. And, you know, not everybody knows what you're talking about. And remembering that, I think, is really important. Just for being able to speak plainly is like, you actually do a very good job. Like when I was like, I'm like, what is this thing going on at Cleveland Museum of Art? And so yeah, it's important to remember not to always speak up here or down here, but in the middle where you really get to the essence of the project.
And it can be super educational to hear one of your coworkers explain to someone else what you do. Like,
Right.
My job is like, oh, okay.
And I actually think, I think this idea of going back and forth is actually really, really useful as a strategy, because we all have our own weird nomenclatures for whatever it is that we do. And I think, part of the thing is that you get deep into a project and then you forget that like nobody else has been on this ride with you, and except for like the 3 people on your project, right? So you end up kind of developing your own vocabulary. And I think being kind of forcing yourself to go out and have that like back and forth with somebody else helps you to figure out how to do it. Like some, even people who are good at translating what's going on, you forget. Because especially like if you've been on something for a long time, you just forget, like nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. And so that exercise of going back and forth with somebody who has no connection whatsoever to your project is super, super useful.
And it's that story too that connects. I had a great conversation about Loud Lamb and linked open data, and my kind of response to it was, that's not going to connect with people. Tell the story of what that's going to do, because that is amazing.
Right.
And that story is something that we should be telling again and again, and we'll probably have to tell it till we get very sick of it. But it's the story that's going to sell. And when I think about our internal projects, whether it's social media or the online collection or the website, it's the stories of what our visitors can do, and particularly the stories that involve the mission of the institution that get people excited. And so even my small group of digital compatriots, the fun thing is they get really excited by the mission of the institution. And so when we can link even our social media efforts to bringing art to the people of North Carolina every day, then yes, we've got them.
you have to remember also that people get excited about the weirdest things on a project. And your core thing, you may see, this is the core thing that we're gonna bring to the people and bring it forward. And it's amazing how much buy-in you won't get on that, but then there's something small about it.
Right.
Like, oh, we're saving some power. Are they not excited about that? Really? This is the thing that's exciting to you?
Yeah.
You know, so knowing that there are multiple ways to get excited about it,
Right.
and not being too incredulously stunned when they are excited about it.
Or at least not letting them know how to.
They're not feeling offended when they're not excited about the things.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great
Right, because you're not there like, what's wrong with you?
Well, I think your acronym point is a good one too, though. About I was in I've been in meetings where you have a group of people. It's interdisciplinary, so all kinds of different people, and everyone has a hot button word. Like everyone has a word they do not want to hear. And I've been in meetings where my previous the sort of previous head of art, somebody, we'll just say who she is. She's powerful. She was powerful. You could see like the blood pressure rising every time, an IT person would start saying an acronym, and they had no idea. And then, her blood pressure's rising, she's so mad. And then she would start talking, and she was using terminology that they didn't get. And then his blood pressure would rise, and, they had no idea that they were pissing each other off for no reason. And it was just because they weren't, translating it. They were using all these acronyms. But on the opposite side, having been through that project, and it was, an interactive we did years ago, all of the rest of us peons, and this was, when I was just first starting out at the institution, we all, from all departments, and that actually includes the guy I buy cookies for, who still works at our institution, we were like trial by fire, we became buddies. And so then we all came together, and actually the librarians who I worked with on that project, it was like trial by fire. We were all in this together, and now we're buddies and we work with each other. So sometimes that initial discomfort, if you can figure out how to translate, really can create this very strong foundation for projects.
Still waiting. Somebody wants the fish.
I think PR website guy.
That's right. Oops, I deleted the collection.
That's like a trump card right there.
So, would you like to come get your fish?
Smoked salmon?
We could also throw it at you.